Welcome to Two Trick Pony, a twice-monthly podcast where we explore all the ways that people have found and cultivated their second tricks, from printmaking to politics and everything in between. We're your hosts. I'm Melissa Betters.
And I'm Clara Ma, and we thank you for joining us. Each week, we invite guests onto the show who have broken away from the expectations of their training, education, or CV to find fulfilling hobbies or even entirely new careers.
We take a look at how cultivating a multifaceted self can lead you to community, connection, and confidence.
In the spirit of July 4th and America's 250th birthday, we are joined this week by Professor Richard Bell, Professor of American History at the University of Maryland and author of the new book, The American Revolution and the Fate of the World, which looks at the American Revolution from a global perspective. Together, we discuss a historical two-trick pony from American history, Benjamin Franklin.
While most people know Benjamin Franklin as one of the founding fathers of the United States, he was also much more than that. A printmaker, author, scientist, postmaster, philanthropist, educator, diplomat, revolutionary, and musician, Benjamin Franklin could be considered America's first and most famous polymath. Throughout his life, Ben Franklin always looked for opportunities to improve both himself and the world around him, defying expectations and constantly reinventing himself. That's why we think his story is a perfect fit for our show.
As the United States reflects on its 250-year history and the future ahead, we thought it would be useful to pause and take a closer look at the past. With Professor Bell's expert knowledge to guide us, we reflect in this episode on what the story of Ben Franklin can tell us about the multifaceted nature, the admirable, the questionable, the in-between, of one of America's founding fathers, and of our nation itself.
And with that, we'll turn to our conversation today with Professor Richard Bell, calling in from the University of Maryland, College Park. So welcome, Dr. Richard Bell, to the Two Trick Pony podcast. We're very excited to have you on today.
Hey folks, it's great to be here.
For our listeners, can you give a brief introduction of who you are, a little bit about your background, and what we're going to be talking about today?
Oh, sure, yeah. I'm Rick Bell. I'm a professor of history at University of Maryland in College Park, which is where I'm sitting right now. I'm a professor of early American history, especially the period between the Revolution and the Civil War. I actually just wrote a book about the global history of the American Revolution called The American Revolution and the Fate of the World. But it's a bit ironic, perhaps, that a British person is writing about the American Revolution. I grew up in North London, went to school in the UK till I was about 21, discovered American history really late, like it was a secret British teachers had been keeping from me. And then got really interested, went to pursue graduate degrees in the US and never went home. So I've been in the US very happily for the last 25 years. I'm married to someone from Missouri, of all places, which when you grow up in North London is not your life plan. And we have two terrifyingly American children, two daughters aged 9 and 12. So America's been very good to me. And we're talking today about Ben Franklin, who I have almost nothing in common with. Who does, really? A unique individual in certain ways. I guess one connection that does jump to mind is pretty modest, which is that we both traveled across the Atlantic a ton. Ben Franklin did something extraordinary for someone who was not a sailor in the 18th century. He traveled across the Atlantic 8 times. That's 8 times more than George Washington, for instance. Pretty unusual. And my dad has started keeping track of how many times I've flown across the Atlantic. And he estimates I've traveled across the Atlantic in an aeroplane 156 times. So we both have transatlantic travel in common.
Wow, that is a lot of flights.
I was going to ask, you said that, you felt like American history was a secret that had been kept from you. Do you remember, what about American history drew you in and encouraged you to pursue your career in it?
Yeah, I think I do, actually, because when I went to college in the UK, I was a history major because I'd discovered history in 10th, 11th grade when we got a good teacher, but I was studying medieval European history, which is much closer to Britain's geography, right, in the continent of Europe. And I eventually ran out of courses on medieval European history to take without being much better at European languages than I am. So I was fishing around for a course or two to take to build up my college credits to try and graduate on time. And I stumbled into a class on colonial and revolutionary American history taught by a professor called Betty Wood. And she was one of the most brilliant teachers I've ever encountered. And if she'd been teaching Russian history or Egyptian history, I would be telling you about how amazing Russian history and Egyptian history is today. So a good teacher, right at the right time at the end of undergrad, turned me on to American history. But honestly, American history is not widely taught in the UK, at least when I was growing up. And even for my little nephew growing up in London's public schools right now, I think it's still very much a side interest. They might do Martin Luther King, they might do the transatlantic slave trade, but American history is not a core focus outside the United States. And yet here I am teaching it.
I mean, even in America, it may have been a while since people have taken an American history class. A lot of people tend to take history through maybe high school, and that's kind of their last foray into it, unless they pursue it as their own personal interest. So for those who might need a refresher, can you tell us a little bit about who Ben Franklin, who we're talking about today, was, and why he's important enough to have a podcast episode dedicated to him?
Oh, Ben Franklin is a 2-trick pony, a 3-trick pony, a 10-trick pony. I don't know how many ponies he is, but it's a lot of ponies. So I teach a course on Ben Franklin here at University of Maryland, and it's based on a similar course I took as a student when I was in graduate school. And the course is called The 9 Lives of Benjamin Franklin, and it breaks up his extraordinary life and times into, I think, roughly 9 discrete units, sometimes more, sometimes less, and tries to show students just all the different contexts in which he lived. So I talk about his career as a printer, one of the greatest printers of the 18th century. I talk about his career as an American politician, as a global statesman, as a slaveholder, as a diplomat. I talk about his private life, his family life, his revolutionary career. We can divide up Franklin's extraordinary, busy, cluttered life any number of different ways. And each of those lives is a lens, really, into different fields of American history, different groups of people. So comparing his life as a scientist to his life as a slaveholder obviously provokes some interesting comparisons there. But this is a man who did not waste time. This is a man who decided he wanted to be useful. So actually philanthropy and community organizing and civic mindedness were another big endeavor for him. To study Benjamin Franklin is, I think, to be taken into multiple different worlds of colonial and revolutionary America, but also to get very tired and to be wowed by this man's extraordinary energy. He's always doing something, probably multiple things.
You mentioned that you've structured the course in terms of the 9 lives. Can you talk a little bit about his early life and why that may have set him up on a path like this? Keep in mind that a lot of the people that we talk to for this podcast, this is a little bit of an unusual episode because typically we're talking to people about their own lives, and they kind of range in ages from like young people trying to figure themselves out to older people who are reaching retirement and trying to decide like what they want to do next. And so this historical lens, I think, is a different perspective. And Benjamin Franklin, to many people who are familiar with his many adventures and exploits, are very kind of wowed by just the extent to which he was engaged in so many different things. I'm curious, what about his early life kind of set him up potentially for that? Or what kind of challenges did he face that may have influenced how he thought about what he wanted to be doing?
It's a great question. I mean, I think this is one of the questions that drives biographers of Franklin to keep going back to his life and writing new books. They want to answer that question. What drives this man to become this person that he becomes, flaws and all, of course. He's by no means a perfect individual. We can talk about those flaws, I hope, later on. But yes, he is born into a large family descended from congregational stock in Boston in 1706. If I'm remembering correctly, he is the 14th of 15 children born to his father, Josiah Franklin, and and Josiah's had two wives. The first one sadly passed away after giving birth to many children, and then he remarried. And young Ben Franklin is the product of that second marriage. His mother is a woman named Abiah. So they had a lot of kids. And if I'm remembering correctly, Ben was the youngest son, maybe the 10th of 10 sons. And if you know much about sort of patriarchy in the 18th century world, you know that families store up their resources for the elder sons. And so if you are the 10th son, you are out of luck in terms of inheriting family resources or being a focus of much attention. So without disparaging his parents, I think it's pretty easy to say that Benjamin was largely ignored and written off by his parents, who had many older sons to try to set on various professional and economic ladders. And I think those low expectations probably are one thing that drove him, because from a young age, it was very clear to those around him, and I'm thinking of his uncle, who took a strong interest in young Ben's life. It was very clear that there was something unusual about young Ben Franklin, that he had an innate curiosity, an innate intelligence, an innate appetite, and fundamentally an innate restlessness that he didn't see in other children or even other Franklin children. If you look at the fates of the 9 other Franklin boys, I mean, they all go on to do productive things, but none of them would be mistaken as a carbon copy of young Benjamin Franklin. There's something unusual about young Benjamin Franklin, and I'm not smart enough to know whether that's nature or nurture or something else, but there's something to do with him that thankfully his Uncle Ben noticed and started developing a good, strong bond with this otherwise ignored young kid. We think it was Uncle Ben, who, by the way, lived in the house with the parents and some of the children, who persuaded Ben's father and mother, Josiah and Abiah, to do the unthinkable, which is send their 10th son off to private school, not something that normally happens to people so far down the food chain. So sometime around his 6th birthday, young Ben Franklin was unexpectedly packed off to Boston's best and most expensive school, Boston Latin, which is probably still Boston's best and most expensive school today, 250 years, 300 years later. So they were clearly scrimping and saving to try to give this surprisingly curious and smart kid the best possible start, plucking him out of a fate which would otherwise have left him following his dad into his dad's job. And his dad was a candle maker, making candles and soap for pennies. This would not have been a particularly ambitious career for young Benjamin Franklin. But 2 years of school expose him to the world of books. It piques his curiosity further. The only tragedy here is that the money runs out pretty quick. Josiah and Abiah don't have money to keep sending him to this extraordinarily expensive school. So they have to pull him out after 2 years because they can't pay the tuition bills anymore. And so they then apprentice him not to be a candle maker, which was the course that was previously set for him, but to apprentice him to one of his older brothers, James Franklin, who was a printer in Boston. And they hoped that at least Ben Franklin, who's demonstrated a strong interest in words and language and books and ideas, can train to be a printer. And so that will be the new course that young Ben Franklin is set out on. And if I could summarize here, I would say that he does train to become a printer, but he becomes restless under the custody of his elder brother. They don't have a great relationship. He eventually runs away from his elder brother, breaking his legal indenture, his legal apprenticeship to him, becomes a fugitive of the law, leaves Boston, arrives in Philadelphia beyond his brother's reach, continues his apprenticeship or his training as a printer there, and will eventually take over a print shop in Philadelphia, which will be the seed of Benjamin Franklin's future media empire. And I could talk a lot about that media empire, which is based around newspapers and almanacs. The point of mentioning that is that it not only exposes him to a world of books and ideas through being in a print shop every day, it also makes him rich. And his media empire will pay for everything else he ever does in his life, whether that's philanthropy, whether that's science, whether that's slaveholding, whatever else it might be. So that's the journey he's on.
Yeah, it's really an amazing story, because I think when I first started looking up Ben Franklin for myself, it wasn't obvious to me. You know, we hear about all of his accomplishments from our current perspective, but knowing that he had relatively humble origins, that he came from not a rich family, is something that I think does set him apart a little bit, that he really built a lot of his accomplishments through his own sort of brute force making things happen. And Claire and I are now located in DC, but we both did our graduate degrees in Philadelphia. And so
I did my graduate degree at the University of Pennsylvania, so
founded by Franklin, of course.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
yes.
The big statue of Ben Franklin. There's multiple statues of Ben Franklin.
Yeah, the imprint
all over the walk.
Yeah, and the imprint of Ben Franklin, you know, is so prevalent throughout the city of Philadelphia. Can you tell us a little bit about how Philadelphia really became his home when when he really established himself in the city?
Yeah, absolutely, right. And, we're starting to frame him as a sort of up by his bootstraps, self-made man. And there's some truth to that, of course. But we should, of course, pause at some point in this conversation to note all the help and dependence that allowed him to rise in that particular way. But yeah, Philadelphia will become his adopted hometown. And nowadays it's fun to watch Boston, where he was born, and Philadelphia, where he chose to spend his life, sort of compete for the legacy of Benjamin Franklin. So he builds his career there to be as far away from his brother as possible, and because he has the opportunity to take over a struggling newspaper, which becomes the seed of this sprawling, franchised print empire across the British colonies. It's also where he falls in love with at least one person, but I'll focus on the woman he married, Deborah Franklin, Deborah Reed, to use her maiden name. And like many young men on the make, he has the great fortune of marrying someone who provides access and connections to him, a newcomer in the city, through her father, who's a somewhat wealthy man, owns a couple of lots on Market Street, which was then called the High Street back in Philly, whose family knows everyone. And so they form a common law marriage because Deborah's already been married, but her husband is missing at sea. And she will mother his 3 children, 2 of which are Deborah's biological children with Ben. That's their daughter Sarah, known as Sally, their son Francis, known as Frankie, although sadly Frankie will die at age 4. Deborah also mothers a young man that Ben Franklin brings into that marriage, a bastard son he'd had outside of marriage with Deborah, with an unknown woman who was not Deborah. So think about what it takes of Deborah to decide to raise a stepson who Ben's had with some other woman who is no longer on the scene. Deborah's an extraordinary individual, and as the print shop grows in success, we see Deborah take over more and more of its day-to-day running. And that's because Ben Franklin starts to travel, starts to go places. He goes on various missions on behalf of the Pennsylvania Assembly to treat with indigenous people in various parts of the colonies. He will go to London multiple times. That's one of the reasons he's taking so many transatlantic voyages, basically as a lobbyist on behalf of the Pennsylvania colony or factions within the Pennsylvania colony. And all the time, his business is not only ticking over, it's expanding. And that's largely because of Deborah's daily work to build that business out. And when Ben formally retires from his day-to-day job in the print shop, he's only 42 years old. Now, that is younger than me, and I'm nowhere near retirement yet, so I'm very jealous of someone who retires at 42, but it's in part because he's delegating the continuing running of the print shop to other people in his life, including Deborah, while he starts taking on political jobs for Philadelphia, for Pennsylvania, even military roles, and also all sorts of community organizing and philanthropy. It's thanks to Ben Franklin that Philadelphia's streets will be paved and lighted and cleaned and swept. For instance, he'll donate money to all the building funds and capital campaigns of every church and synagogue in the city. He builds Philadelphia into that tremendously cosmopolitan place you will recognize from graduate school. No wonder his name is on every building.
You did mention a little bit about the narrative of the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I do think it's important that we dissect that a little bit, that we do talk about that, because while Ben Franklin was able to do all of these amazing things during his life, it is also true that he held a very specific position in society at that time. And so one of the questions that I really wanted to get at was really the context, the societal context in which he operated. Why was he able to pursue all of these different careers and interests, either in philanthropy or, the establishment of the American Philosophical Society, things like this, all of his scientific endeavors? What about the societal context of the time allowed him to do these things? And I guess it's an important question to consider of who was not able to do those things at that time.
Yeah, this is such an important question, right? And I do think the myth of the self-made man hangs over Benjamin Franklin in particular compared to any other founding father. I mean, George Washington's born with a silver spoon in his mouth, so is Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, but I think Benjamin Franklin is almost unique among the founding fathers. Tom Paine's the only other person really to emerge from the working class to reach the pantheon of American founders, and Tom Paine's far less well known today than Ben Franklin. So Ben Franklin's rise is certainly predicated on his own drive and ambition, which should not be dismissed. He is relentless and energized and industrious, and he's committed to improving himself and the world around him. And those are laudable things that deserve our attention. But it's also worth reminding everyone that to do that, he built networks of peers and of dependents, and he pulled on those networks. He leveraged those networks just repeatedly. So we can see him trying to insert his way into scientific networks of communication and discovery and prestige. He's constantly writing to European scientists saying, look what I've done, look what I've done. Do you like it? Do you like it? Do you like it? If you don't like it, tell me how I can make it better, right? So he's definitely seeking recognition and standing from European scientists who he regards as the pinnacle. And thankfully, they're willing to see his genius and bestow it on him. We've talked a little bit about his economic rise in terms of how valuable the printing empire is. If you know anything about printing in the 18th century, it's not something one person does. It's something a team of people do. So Benjamin Franklin uses indentured servants, many of whom are apprentices trying to better their skills and become master printers like him. He also uses enslaved labor in the print shop in Philadelphia, which is very common. There's nothing unusual about it, but it's striking, I think, that this man we associate with American freedom kept in the course of his life 10 people in a state of utter unfreedom. We know their names, and we know a little bit about their lives as enslaved individuals. And Franklin, by the way, never freed any of them. They either ran away or they died. So Franklin doesn't do much practical abolition in his life. He depends on coerced labor and in other species of unfreedom. We talked about his dependence on Deborah, a very capable woman who he was lucky to marry, and I recognize that from my own marriage. We should point out that other people with similar ambition, drive, and appetite may not have had access to the same opportunities that he did. And the best example, of course, is women in the 18th century, right? Deborah couldn't build a print empire on her own if she wanted to. She could only do it as a deputy husband, right? When her husband is away, that's when she steps in. Or if Franklin had died, she would have taken over his business. But women can't start these sort of businesses because of patriarchy and misogyny. And there's a great book about this, which doesn't actually focus on Deborah. It focuses on Benjamin Franklin's beloved younger sister, Jane, known as Jenny. And Benny and Jenny were thick as thieves when they grew up in Boston together. And Jenny was just as, I think, sparky and vibrant and curious as he was, but she's the 15th child of 15. She's a daughter, a woman. Her path is going to be very different to Ben's, right? He can make his own destiny to some degree or other. She is a victim of destiny. And so in the biography of Jane Franklin, written by the great Harvard historian Jill Lepore, and the book is called Book of Ages, and I strongly recommend it to everyone listening, she shows how Jane's life is really hemmed in by patriarchal expectations. She marries someone who is beneath her. He dies, leaving her in debt. When the American Revolution comes around, she will be buffeted around as a victim of that war. She'll become a refugee of that war. She'll lose everything twice. 3 of her children will die or run mad. She's buffeted by disaster after disaster. It's very hard to see her as the author of her own destiny, and that's not for lack of, curiosity and ambition or anything like that. It's because of the role she's placed in by virtue of her sex and misogyny.
No, it's fascinating to hear just, these contrasting lives and trajectories. On one hand, you were saying at the beginning that Benjamin Franklin had all these other siblings, and that in some ways it provides us with a good example or good kind of comparative examples of when you have that many siblings. It's, there's some constants that are held, and then you can really see the impact of the context that they were living in.
You've got 15 data points, Claire, but only one breaks the trajectory of the others. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying, this is, with that small of a number, it's probably better for in-depth case studies of each of them, which, is what the historians are doing. I wanted to kind of bring this back to maybe the present day and think about how, what are the lessons that we can kind of draw from Ben Franklin? Some of the things you were saying earlier about how he inserted himself into different networks, that I think a lot of young people today are being told very similar things about how to find what they're going to be doing next, who the networks you're in. Obviously, there are other aspects of Ben Franklin's life, as you said, his dependence on coerced labor, that are things that people should not be dependent on today. And just curious, the reason why we wanted to talk to you about Ben Franklin now is because it is America's 250th. And we sit in DC. There's a lot of discussion and debate about how to think about the 250th. And I'm curious, from your perspective and your expertise of Ben Franklin, what do you think the life of Ben Franklin tells us about who we are as a country today, and for today's, especially young people who are looking up and seeing the country changing in such a dramatic way?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer, and historians aren't great at, diagnosing contemporary problems or predicting the future or anything like that. But I will say that in my study of the American past, I'm convinced that America and Americans contain multitudes, and you can find very humbling and depressing and tragic examples of Americans behaving abominably to their fellow human beings in American history, just as you can in British history and German history and any other national history you care to name around the world. But you can also find inspirational stories. Sometimes those stories refer to the same people, right? Tragedy and triumph in the same life. And I think you can certainly see that in Benjamin Franklin. For all the, I think, misery he certainly inflicted on enslaved people that he held in bondage, he's also someone who is well liked by those in his contemporary circle, who even when he's really busy, really famous and really popular, makes time for any children he meets and, takes them into his care. He writes one of his funniest poems when he's an old man and a young child he meets in Britain has had her pet squirrel mauled by a dog, and he writes a funny poem to try to cheer her up about that. So this is a man with a sort of sparkle and twinkle in his eye. But as to sort of lessons for today, we should say that building networks is always a good use of people's time. Leveraging expertise, creating force multipliers is always a good use of your time. And getting up every morning and asking yourself, how can I make the world better today? How can I improve myself today? Are two excellent questions to ask yourself when you set out. Benjamin Franklin wrote a memoir, an autobiography, later in life that, like any autobiography, is very self-serving and paints himself in very, very flattering ways. But if we are to believe the memoir, and it should probably be taken with a pinch of salt, those are the sort of questions that he, as a younger man, woke up with every day. How can I improve myself today? How can I make this world a little bit better today? If we all do that, then big changes, I think, are certainly possible.
I think I walked by that quote about how you should wake up and think of how you're going to better the world every day when I was walking to my classes at Penn, because I think it's engraved on one of the walks on the university. So as a reminder, maybe if you didn't think about that immediately when you woke up going to class at 8 a.m. on a Monday, you look down and say, okay, this is a reminder. There's a reason I'm here.
That was an interesting piece of his history that I uncovered in doing some of the research for this in preparation for this interview, was how much he was driven by trying to improve the world around him. You can speak to more of this, but I thought it was interesting how one of the reasons why he was so interested in printmaking and authoring pieces to be printed was to uplift a moral and ethical America in some ways, even before it became America, with his scientific endeavors. Can you talk a little bit more, bringing that lesson and reflecting on where you kind of see that reflected throughout his story and throughout his life?
I would say his philanthropic career is really extraordinary, and its intensity and its relentlessness over about 20 years while he's living primarily in Philadelphia that leaves such a mark. So a lot of it is self-centered, of course. He starts a book group, basically a discussion group among working men, where they can pool ideas and resources to advance each other in their careers. But that working men's discussion group, it's called the Junto, will become the nub of two organizations that still exist in Philadelphia today. One is the American Philosophical Society, which is a great library, and then the other is the Library Company of Philadelphia, which became the first subscription library open to working people in Philadelphia. So often his self-interested motives would give way to something that served a broader community. We have Ben Franklin to thank for founding what became the Pennsylvania Hospital in 1751, which is now part of Penn Medicine. For instance, he develops a flexible catheter to treat his brother John's painful kidney stones. But that invention is effectively a gift to the world. We can see that with the Franklin stove as well, which improves, heat and safety for hundreds of working families in Pennsylvania. He's a big proponent in his media empire, in his almanacs and newspapers, of various sensible public health initiatives, most famously inoculation. Inoculation is a relatively new technology. It's the precursor of modern vaccinations today. But in the 18th century, it's a new technology. Many people are skeptical of it. And he is trying to remind people that it is safe and effective. So he's playing a role as sort of an unofficial public health advisor in Philly through his newspaper. And even though that's a serious example, he's also filling his newspaper with slightly more lighthearted advice about public health. Like, he wants you to exercise every day. The gyms haven't been invented yet, though if they had, he would tell you you should probably go to one. Instead, his big recommendation for personal fitness for the people of Philadelphia is that they should swim to work. Philadelphia has 2 rivers. Jump in one on your way to work and you'll be at work in no time. So slightly fanciful today, but the general point is that people should take care of themselves and take care of each other, and that will build a better city and a better world.
I was going to say, the public health advice today is do not jump into those rivers. The Schuylkill is definitely not a place for you to be swimming.
Yeah, I just saw in London, where I'm from, they opened a public swimming pool using Thames water. I was like, there's no way I'm getting in there.
Turning from Ben Franklin and looking outwards at America as a whole, as a scholar of history, what is something that you wish listeners knew about the study of American history?
About the study of American history? Geez. Well, I will make some general remarks. I'm a big promoter of history, partly because it's my career and pays my bills, right, and keeps me employed. But I do think that if you're anything like me, you might not have had a great high school history education, right? I had teachers in 8th and 9th grade whose ideas of what history was just memorizing names and dates. And I found that as a young kid really tedious. Why am I doing this? What's the point? When will someone ever ask me in a job interview, who was the Pope in the year 1562, right? But somehow that was information I was forced to remember for a test. So it's only really when I've had a couple of great teachers in my life that I've realized what history actually is all about. History is actually about understanding the world then and informing our understanding of the world now. History is constantly about asking why questions, which of course are some of the same questions scientists and policy analysts work on as well. History is no different. But history also has a deep interest in developing empathy for people in the past. So we try to understand why people who are very different to us made the decisions and behaved the way they did back then. And to be able to understand people's in the past's behaviors and decisions requires sort of putting ourselves in their shoes for a little bit. And when we put ourselves in anyone else's shoes, what we're developing there is empathy, understanding the world from someone else's eyes. And I think building up your capacity for empathy, whether it's for people that have been dead for 300 years or people that disagree with you about some policy issue in America today, that having empathy for other points of view, I think is incredibly important, particularly in this hyperpolarized partisan environment. So I think history skills have particular utility as we navigate through this very challenging period of American history. And I also think as AI reshapes higher education and the job market before our eyes, I think humanities courses and history in particular can offer young people a really powerful education in critical reading, critical writing, critical speaking, and critical thinking. And those tools will always have value in the job market. So I hope that people, as we navigate these challenges, re-embrace the study of history and the humanities more broadly. They're more valuable now than ever.
Yeah, I agree with that very wholeheartedly. My PhD was focused in historical political science. I was part of the American Political Development Group when I was at Penn, which, has a storied legacy. And I think from my experience with historical work, it's the biggest and most helpful thing that it did for me was it gave me perspective. And I think just being able to look at things that happened in the past, understand to what extent something is similar today or what is truly unprecedented was really helpful for me, because I think that's where the historical perspective was so important. And in many ways also kind of just, it just provides a lot of context. I wanted to ask you, given that there's just so many different things that you could focus on, what are you working on next? You mentioned that you have just published a book that looks at the U.S.'s history and it's a global impact. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then a little bit about what you might be doing next, since that's always a question that I think academics are faced with.
That's right. What have you done lately? Great question. So I just have a big book out, and I encourage people to check it out. It's called The American Revolution and the Fate of the World. I'm super proud of it. It's the first global history of the American Revolutionary War. So it begins the story of America's founding in China, and it ends that story in India. And it rolls around the world, looking at the French, the Spanish, the Irish, the Germans, Native Americans, black people from Africa and elsewhere, you name it. And it follows their journeys through revolutionary America and out the other side. So if you just thought the American Revolution was, I don't know, the I-95 corridor or the Acela corridor, if you like taking Amtrak, then it's not. It's a much bigger. It's a worldwide war. And I tell that story and at the story of its global ripple effects in that new book. Take a look. And then I've also got a new video course that just dropped on a streaming platform called The Great Courses. And my video course is called The Declaration of Independence, America's Birth Certificate. And it's 12 parts, 30 minutes each, video lectures, a deep dive, deeper than most people have ever been before, into the history and consequences of America's birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence. You can look for that when you find your streaming services. And then I'm trying to figure out what my next book is going to be about. But one of the ideas I have, and it may well turn out to be the idea I go with, is a new biography of Benjamin Franklin, someone I've been teaching about for 20 years, focused on those 8 transatlantic journeys he took and using them as sort of 8 tentpole moments in his very varied and dynamic life. So stay tuned. We'll see if that transpires.
Yeah, you'll have to let us know when that, I know historical work from experience talking with the faculty, that it takes a while. So we'll be waiting for the book on Benjamin Franklin. I'm glad I got a preview of it today.
How long did a transatlantic voyage take in Ben Franklin's time? How long are we talking about him being on a ship?
Yeah, great question, of course, because nothing then is steam-powered, and there's definitely no aeroplanes, though they do have just invented hot air balloons by the time Franklin dies. But yeah, these voyages are by sail, so it depends on the winds and the currents. So a quick journey across the Atlantic, imagine, Philadelphia to London, 6 weeks, maybe 5 if you're really lucky. A slow journey, 12 weeks, right? That's 3 months of your life on a ship, right? Can you imagine? And so you can understand then why Benjamin Franklin is a careful student of what we now call the Gulf Stream, the warmer waters in the mid-Atlantic that have fast currents. He's very interested in navigating exactly where the Gulf Stream is so that ships can start to ride the Gulf Stream intentionally and cut down some of those journey times. So I'm hopefully interested in doing some of that scientific recovery work myself at some point in the future so I can better understand that breakthrough.
Yeah, I'm in a unique position where I can definitely imagine being on a ship for quite a long time. As a marine biologist, my longest research cruise from start to finish was 50 days, with the second longest being 2 stints of 30 days back to back, so 60 days total. So
rather you than me.
So she has experience
so
being on
I
the ocean for that long.
Yeah, I definitely can sympathize, but luckily we weren't sailing by sail. So we'd like to close out this interview with just a few quick rapid fire questions. We do this for all of our guests. These are meant to be short, few word answers, quick questions, quick answers.
I feel like this one's somewhat controversial, but reading or writing history?
Both, please.
Good answer.
Favorite founding father?
Ben Franklin by a mile.
Okay, we weren't sure if you would have another one to throw out as a wild card.
If I can't have Ben Franklin, I'll take Thomas Paine.
Wonderful.
If you could recommend only one book of American history to the audience, what would it be?
If you're not going to let me recommend my own book about the American Revolution, then I will say if you haven't read Benjamin Franklin's Autobiography since high school, go and reread it again. It's a lovely piece of literature. He lies through his teeth on every page, but he is a delightful narrator and companion.
I don't think I've read that, so I'm adding it to my reading list.
What would be the ultimate gift to buy somebody who's into American history?
The streaming platform, The Great Courses, has thousands of video courses by professors all across the country, many of which have a focus on history or American history. I've contributed 3 courses to that library, but there's literally thousands you could take advantage of. There's a lifelong learning experience for $10 a month or something like that.
That's great.
You've shared several fun facts already, but can you share another fun fact about Ben Franklin?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of fun facts about Ben Franklin from different ends of his life. One was that he was ever so briefly accused of murder as a young boy, which of course he was not guilty of, though someone should write a great novel about that moment in his life. And then later, towards the end of his life, when he is a diplomat in Paris trying to negotiate the peace treaty with Britain, he discovers that his own secretary is a British spy.
Wow.
Cliffhanger.
Da, da, da.
And finally, do you have any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with our audience?
I just hope everyone re-embraces history. We're in 2026, which is America's 250. I do think this is a momentous and important anniversary, and that if you haven't taken a look at the history of America's founding conflict in a while, this would be the year to re-engage with it.
So thank you so much, Dr. Bell, for this really enlightening look into Ben Franklin's life, and also to hear a little bit more about the practice of history and its importance today. So I wanted to just say thank you again for taking the time.
It was great talking with you.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in this week. We will be back with new episodes in the fall.
If you want to get in touch with us, or if you know a two-trick pony who would be a great fit for the show, please let us know by email at twotrickponypodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at twotrickponypodcast. Those are both with the number 2.
And if you liked this podcast, please rate us and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.